And a very good afternoon. It's 25 minutes away from 2 o'clock. Happy to take your calls. 8223 0000 is the number to call. Well, the state government is putting education firmly on the election agenda, extending the school card eligibility threshold from 37,000 to 57,000. Quite a significant jump. This follows nearly 2,000 families being taken to court for failing to pay their public school fees in the last financial year. That's more than double the previous financial year. Joining us now to discuss the planned changes is the Minister for Education and Childhood Development, Susan Close. Minister, good afternoon.
Lovely to be here.
How many families are affected by this increase that you've announced?
It will cover about 16,000 families or 29,000 children who are currently going to our schools but having to pay fees. Their household income is below the mean in Adelaide, and we think that we need to make sure that families who are doing it a bit tough are getting all the help they can from the state government. Education's compulsory. Have to send your kids to school. We want you to send your kids to school. So being able to just make this a bit fairer, I think, is really important. And I'm so pleased that we're able to do it.
So, as I said, the threshold has gone from 37,000 up to 57,000. That's for a single child, isn't it?
That's right. And then it's almost 58,000 is the threshold for a single child, and then it goes up by increments of $1,000 a year that you can earn for an additional child and not have to pay the school fees.
And how are you funding this? Will it be a case of that I don't have a school card? Will I be subsidising those who are?
No, that's absolutely not the plan. We're adding money to schools to make this work. It's going to cost the government about $30 million over the next 4 years to deliver. And the reason we're able to do this, and a number of other announcements we'll be making in the near future, is that we stuck to our side of Gonski. Now, I know some people go, get over Gonski. I'm not over Gonski, because that was a 6-year deal to increase the amount of money going to our schools. The last 2 years were the ones that had all the money in, 75%. That's next year and it's the year after. So although we've lost our federal partners largely, we've stuck to our share, which means we have money to spend on education, and we should spend it to make families' lives easier and to get a better quality of education for our students.
What about this issue that is becoming an increasingly large one as far as the zoning is concerned and the amount of schools that we've got out there? It's interesting. We do a real estate segment each week with wonderful Toop and Toop, the biggest real estate organisation in the state. And one of the things that comes up on nearly every second call we get is, I want to buy a house in this region purely and simply on the condition that it's in a certain school zone. That's an issue that has been around for a long time. What can we do about it?
It has, and it's, I think, exacerbated by people thinking that they have to make an active choice about where their kids go to school. Back a long time ago, when I was at school, many years ago, the natural choice was just to go to the school near where you happen to want to live anyway. We've now got this kind of pressure on families, you don't really care about your kids' education if you don't make an active choice. And it makes parents anxious, and it makes them think they're somehow not doing the right thing if they don't either take their kids to a non-government school or get into a zone for one of the wealthier suburbs. Now, I just don't think that's necessary. And one of the reasons we have a series of ads at the moment on television about the quality of public education is that every public school is a good school. We fund them well. We'll be funding them even more over the next couple of years. And we're funding them in a way that's about getting the basics right so that their literacy and numeracy are good, but also that they're being prepared for the jobs of the future. And they're doing that with people they live with people from their community. And when I look at the schools that are bursting at the seams in the eastern suburbs, up to 56% of those kids don't live in the area. And that's no longer a sense of going to your community, being part of, having kids over after school for a play, playing sport with the kids that you go to school with. That starts to break down if we have this pressure on moving children around just for a school. All our schools are good, and they'll be better if we all make that decision to have our kids go nearby.
But the statistics show not all the schools are equal, though. I mean, some of the popular schools that are sought after in those areas are performing better with NAPLAN and, the My School website, etc., etc.
Look, not all our schools, not all our kids are equal is a better way of articulating that. There is a very serious disadvantage for children if they come from a very low-income household where education isn't valued. And when you have a school where there's more of those kids, the NAPLAN result is going to reflect that. That does not mean that if your child is at that school, that's the result they'll get, because we teach to the child and we teach to the child's potential. Some of our best schools are the schools that are in fact countering the effect of not having parents who are particularly supportive. And that's not to say all parents with low incomes are not. No. That is absolutely not the case. But there are those broad generalisations, and there are schools that are working much harder and having much greater impact because they're turning around the impact of the home life on the school life. And that's why public schools are so good and so important to keep them strong and well-resourced.
Do you think there's too much emphasis on such as the NAPLAN? I mean, we have this discussion every time it comes out. We're talking to you only, last month when the results came out. I mean, philosophically, you are either in favour of NAPLAN or not. Personally, I'm not. I think it's a load of rubbish. But we can't ignore it. No, we can't. And I think the best thing we can do is make it useful. So, yes, there are all sorts of problems with NAPLAN. For one thing, it's trying to test every kid in years 3, 5, 7 and 9. So in Australia. So that's a massive effort, and to do a test that big you have to make it fairly clunky. That means you have multiple choice questions where in a normal test you wouldn't use multiple choice ever. And at the moment, because they're not online, there's a big gap between when you do it and when you get the results back. And when you just look at the whole system, you'll see the Northern Territory is at the bottom and the ACT is at the top, and the states range in between essentially on SES level, on socioeconomic status. So it doesn't tell us anything. How does that help anything? Well, what I want to do with it, and what we've made a big decision this year, is to say, okay, yes, we'll be reporting at that level. We always have to. But what I'm really interested in is helping that child who hasn't met the minimum standards and needs to. And I'm interested in this child who actually did really well last time but has slipped off. That lack of growth. So we'll use it diagnostically, and we've put nearly $65 million over the next 4 years, because we've stuck to our share of Gonski, nearly $65 million across, and it's not on the label of the child. We spend a lot on the label. We spend on low SES, on Aboriginality and on disability, and so we should. But this money is about, how's the child performing? Do they need some extra assistance because they haven't reached where they need to? And that's where NAPLAN can be much more useful, as long as you've got the context. You know what happened that day. Normally that child's fantastic, but they were sick. Let's allow the principals and the teachers to make wise decisions, but let's give them the resources to do things with. We're talking to the Minister for Education, Susan Close. Happy to take your calls. 8223 0000.
Connected.
And it's 14 minutes away from 2. We have the Education Minister, Susan Close, with us in the studio. Happy to take your calls, 8223 0000. Minister, you're also announcing today that there's some new language programs going to be introduced. Do I smell an election in the air? There's a bit of cash being tossed around today, Minister. Well, yeah, of course there's an election coming up, but the truth is that we've got a lot more money for our education system in the next 2 years, thanks to our 6-year deal. We've just finally reached years 5 and 6, and the lion's share of the funding was there. And we want to spend it in a way that makes sure that the basics are being cared for, but that kids are being prepared for the jobs of the future. And the languages strategy is absolutely part of that, because the two big shifts we've seen in recent times across the world are, first of all, the shift in technology, that we've just seen just a dramatic increase in the power of computing, and hence our investment in STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. And the other big change is globalisation, that we are connected to every other part of the world, and whether it's serving a coffee for a tourist or it's doing a business deal in China for jobs here, we need our kids to have the horizon, to look over the horizon and see that our future is across our borders. And that requires competence. We need students who are competent at dealing with other cultures, and where possible, being able to speak other people's languages. And I did languages at high school. All the way through to Year 12, I did a couple of languages, and although I haven't learnt Chinese, I find that I have a facility with learning 2 or 3 phrases when I've been to China, because I've learnt other languages. Yep. So it's not so much which language you learn, although it's wonderful if you're really good at Chinese, but it's having that recognition that it makes such a difference to be able to speak some. Under this scheme, 100 secondary students will get scholarships for languages?
Well, that's for study tours. So what we're doing is we're spending nearly $16 million over the 4 years on languages and internationalisation, and most of that money will go into making sure we've got the best teachers. We'll get teachers with more professional development, get more with specialisations in languages, and support them with all the different ways that we have, all the new techniques for language instruction to make it interesting and engaging for students. But we're also supporting students from low SES backgrounds who want to go on study tours with everybody else and don't have the funds to do it, because there is nothing like opening the eyes of a teenager to what is happening overseas. Being there physically makes all the difference, hearing another language being spoken. And it really makes us realise that this little bubble that we can live in is not the only way to live, and that we need to be able to connect across the borders.
An email here from Kat. Hi, Kat. She's saying, how is it that our students are dropping in the international standards for education if we keep on spending more and more money on education?
Well, there's two answers to that. One is that we're not actually doing as badly internationally as sometimes the media would have you, not to blame the media, Alan, but that the commentary would have you believe. And that's South Australia, when they had the recent PISA test, actually did really well. The rest of Australia stagnated and we went up a bit. So, you know, the data is really hard to pull apart. But the truth is we need to keep doing better because the world keeps getting tougher. And to respond to the new economy, we need our students and our children to be better educated. And that means what we were okay at a couple of years ago, we need to be even better at in a few years' time. Now, the question with the money is that although there's been a lot of talk about spending money, the real increase that was set with Gonski doesn't start till next year. We've only had 25% of the money that was suggested. 75% comes in the next 2 years. So it's how we spend it. And no one who's involved in education doesn't know that money matters. It's how you have teachers getting professional development. It's how you have the relief teachers coming in so that the teacher can do that. It's how you have the interventions early in literacy and numeracy with small groups or one-on-one to make sure that those basics aren't missed. It's how you have STEM facilities, science and mathematics facilities, to excite students about the importance of those subjects for the future of the economy. None of that happens without money, but of course you have to spend it wisely.
How do you walk that very tight balance of, for example, a child starting kindy today won't actually hit the workforce until about 2030, 2031. We don't know what the world's going to look like then. How do you walk that tightrope of fostering an education system that's going to actually encompass that end result?
And that's exactly the task that every teacher has every day, and it's a remarkably difficult job we've asked of them. What you need to do is make sure that the fundamental skills, which really are the literacy and the numeracy, but also digital literacy and being able to work with people, that you have those fundamental skills built in from the start, because we know that they will always be necessary, they'll always be useful. Then what you have to do is instill a love of learning, because learning, being educated, is going to be part of the rest of these children's lives. It's no longer possible for people to exit high school in year 10, get a job, that's the job they'll have for the rest of their lives. It will happen occasionally. It's not going to be the norm. So we need to instill in our young people a love of learning and a capacity to ask thoughtful questions and solve problems that they haven't seen before. Because what we do know is that they will be facing problems that we can't even anticipate. And to do those, they'll need critical thinking, they'll need creative thinking, they'll need good content knowledge, but they'll also need to know how to create new knowledge. Now, all of that sounds very complex. In fact, the Australian curriculum does it extremely well. And we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of students in South Australia completing school with their SACE, with their high school certificate. And we are second only to the ACT, and that by a whisker of the percentage of students who finish Year 12 with a certificate. So we've done a tremendous job in South Australia with that. And that is the best way you can prepare children for the future. Get your high school, make it a quality high school certificate, and then be prepared to be engaged in learning for the rest of your life.
What about those who would argue the curriculum is so crowded, so busy, there's so much we're trying to cram in, and we're overlooking the 3 R's that we should be concentrating on?
That's why, as part of our plan, we've articulated the importance of making those basics foundational. You cannot learn anything else if you're not literate and numerate. And while that's always been the case and will always be the case, we're really wanting to return to a proper focus on the early years, getting under their belt, not just being able to read and write, but being able to read for meaning and write with purpose. And to have the basics of numeracy, because numeracy isn't just about being able to do maths in your daily life, as essential as that is, but it is also about creating a sense of logic in students. Maths is an extremely logical discipline, and it's also about creating those foundations for the more complex science and technology that will be a big part of their lives, even if they never work in that field. Technology dominates us. I'm sitting here surrounded by pieces of technology as part of the radio. Every job is going to be affected by it, and we sell our kids short if we don't give them that foundation of numeracy that gives them an entryway into being competent in those areas.
But there's a big difference, isn't there, just between your normal literacy skills and pushing more into the technical side of it, you know, computer programming and that sort of thing.
That's right, and as you say, we do have a very big curriculum, and we require our teachers to be very selective about which elements they focus on, because coding is coming into primary schools, and it should. Coding is going to be one of the languages of the future. There are jobs that go begging in Australia. I understand for cybersecurity jobs, it's 100% employment. They're just desperate for more people. So while it is complex, it's complex for students to learn all of this. That's what they need for a successful future. So we owe it to them to teach it. And the great thing about kids is they're capable of learning so much. They are capable of absorbing more information than we can imagine. And really stretching that capacity is essential. But it has to start with literacy and numeracy, and then it has to build over time. And making sure that we start early is crucial. The importance of preschool and the way in which we do play, learning through play, introducing concepts of literacy and numeracy without being heavy-handed. Just start to get those foundations, and then upon those foundations, students are capable of almost anything.
It's difficult to have a conversation these days about education without talking about STEM, which is the science, technology, engineering and maths. Why do we so often forget to include the arts, as in STEAM? We always hear about STEM, never about STEAM. Is there a possibility here, because it is an area that we're so far behind the eight ball all over Australia, not just South Australia, particularly in the senior years, that the kids who aren't STEM inclined, the more STEAM inclined, more arts inclined, are going to get left behind? Well,
I certainly hope not. That's not the intention at all. There will be a proportion of students who will be highly competent in STEM, and to be highly competent requires an enormous amount of creativity and problem solving. But there are also all the human jobs. There are absolutely creative industries jobs. Your own is part of that. Performance, art, huge part of our very attractive tourism offering that we have in South Australia, and we mustn't neglect those skills. Music, which we've put significant amount of effort into in the last couple of years, and we're starting to see more students studying music instruments, which is wonderful. But also those human skills, the looking after people, those jobs will still be there. They're not so easily automated. We won't have the robots taking over, and it's so important to anticipate these big trends of automation and artificial intelligence, and make sure that we're encouraging the human skills that students have, as well as the power to invent even more exciting technology.
The number to call 8223 0000. Pat's called from Surrey Downs. Hi, Pat.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon, Minister. I just would like to ask you a question, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Do you know, my grandchildren are 16 and they're printing, and they don't seem to be encouraged to do any cursive writing now. I think that's really bad. Have you any idea why that would be?
Yes, there does seem to be, I'm speaking from my own children's experience as well, less emphasis on what we called cursive. I think it's called South Australian Standard now. And that's partly, I think, to do with the need for those students to learn computing skills and typing skills that many of us didn't learn at all at school, unless we were thinking that we might become a secretary, a role that's rapidly disappearing, then we didn't learn those typing skills. So we ask a lot of students, and we're asking them to write clearly as well as to be able to produce using a keyboard. And I am interested, and I've been talking to some of the educational experts about how we make sure that we don't lose that capacity to handwrite in a legible way, whether it's print or cursive. The legibility is important to me, and I think you've hit on something that is of concern to some parents.
You haven't seen my writing, Pat. My goodness, even I can't read it. But I am a good, really fast two-finger typer. There's another caller who's asked, Minister, just finally, does the new CBD high school, which of course is down near the zoo, is it going to cater more for gifted or advanced students? Is there a leaning?
Well, here's the way our schools work. We have comprehensive education, and then we have ways for students from out of the area to come in. So the comprehensive education means you cater for the community where you live, and we have a very large catchment that will cater for both Adelaide High School and the Botanic High School will cater for. So people who live in the area have a right to go to those schools. There is then also the selection where if there's room each year for extra students, Adelaide High School has students who are good at rowing and are good at languages in particular.
They still do cricket? They used to do cricket.
They may well do cricket as well. You may have a more detailed knowledge than I have. We are yet to decide what that will be for the new Botanic High. We've talked about the importance of science, so that there'll be science and health focus at that school, but that will be part of the comprehensive education. We're yet to settle on that, and we'll work through with the community on what they'd like to see.
Okay, and finally, Barbara, is it Elizabeth? Hi, Barbara.
Oh, hi. Hi, Minster. Look, I'd like to give a school a bouquet. Actually, more of a hot dog, thank you. My grandson this year started at Craigmore High School. He has some issues, not defined disability, just illness, and we lost a family member. And I'd just like to say that that school has been absolutely marvellous. Before attending there, my grandson was privately schooled at the little Catholic school. They wanted to go to Craigmore. I was mortified because of what I'd heard, but I can tell you it's an absolute brilliant school, and the staff there have been more than accommodating, giving us extra work when he's not well, and helping us to access different things. So I really think they deserve a big pat on the shoulder, and I don't think they get that too often.
Oh, that is just so wonderful to hear, and I'll make sure that this is passed on to Craigmore. That's an example of a school that we don't hear, about problems with zoning and parents trying to force their kids in, but it's a terrific school and it does an astonishingly good job, and I'm just so delighted that you've chosen to recognise them. Thank you.
Oh, that's fine, lovely. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Well done, Barbara. That's an accolade you don't get very often,
gorgeous.
I would have thought, Minister. Hey, listen, thanks for your time this afternoon. Lots more announcements to be made between now and March, I would imagine.
Indeed, thank you.
All right, thanks so much for your time. 8223 0000.